A lot of people are really into the archetype of the superhero. Batman tries to defend Gotham simply because he's good. The villain, whether it's the Joker, the Riddler, the Two-Face, the Penguin, I don't really like superheroes that much. They're kind of boring to me, but you get the point. They try to inflict harm because they're simply bad. Good guy fights bad guy, and eventually, through a lot of struggle, even though it looks like he's going to lose, good guy trumps over evil. In the real world, outside of media, most conflict arises not because one side is good or one side's bad. It's not simply, he's good, he's gonna fight bad guy, bad. He's gonna try to beat good guy because he a meanie weenie. It's not like that. It's more ambiguous, it's more gray, it's less black or white. Most of the time, when you have a conflict with someone, whether it's a spouse, coworker, a friend, you're more likely to have a conflict with people you're around more just because of probability. You're around them more, you're going to have a conflict. It's due to, a lot of times, either a misunderstanding. Sometimes you might say something and somebody interprets it in a different way. Maybe you were angry and you said something out of anger that hurt that person. A lot of times it's because that person has an interest. You have an interest, and those interests converge against one another. An example would be, you want to go to the game this weekend. Your wife or girlfriend wants you to go to the family reunion, which is exactly the same time during the game. Neither of you are evil, neither of you are bad, neither of you wish ill will on the other. You just have different events that coincide with one another. It's like two trains on a track at the same time in the same area that will converge together, smash into one another, and it will cause friction because they wanted to be in the same place at the same time. And a lot of global conflicts are like that as well, like the current situation with Israel and Palestine. I'm sorry to tell you guys, I've been looking deep into the conflict. There's no good guy, there's no bad guy. Both sides have their issues. World War I. You had imperialist countries like Great Britain and France who wanted territory for their empire. The Ottomans wanted to keep their empire. The Germans wanted more territory. It wasn't clear who was good, who was bad, blah, blah, blah. Even in conflicts where they try to paint it as such, you got to realize when something involves thousands of people and millions of people, there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of optics. It's not as simplistic, it's not Hollywood, it's not he good, he bad. Like the American Civil War, for instance. A lot of people were fighting for the South because their territory was being invaded. There was a farmer from Alabama. They asked him why he's fighting, and he was a prisoner of the war, and he said, I'm fighting because you're down here. You're invading my homeland, you're invading my territory, and like a man, he's fighting back. I would do the same thing if my territory was being invaded by anybody, the government, a foreign government, anybody. As a man, I would fight back. And that's just the way it is. All that being said, there are circumstances where it's different. I'll get into that. But when a conflict arises, and if you know that person, you know they're not a bad person, make sure you tell yourself, they're not out to get me. They're not out to screw me. And when you realize that, and you realize that they want what's good for you, or if they're not acting in good faith, but they're a good person, tell yourself they're a good person, but they're wrong. But as long as you know someone has good intentions, or that overall they're a good person, they're just wrong in this particular circumstance, you can negotiate, you can be diplomatic in good faith. Because you know that person wants what's right. That's how it is in most cases. Even if you don't know the person well, you can sign a peace treaty, not a physical peace treaty, but you can make concessions and be diplomatic about it. The average person doesn't wake up out of bed in the morning and say, "How can I be evil today to my coworkers?" And they sing in their evil lair, like, "I'm going to be evil to my parents today. I'm going to be evil to women today because I'm bad, because I'm evil." And it just doesn't work that way. People don't have time for that shit. They're busy going to their soccer games, their kids' soccer games, going to work, going to the grocery store. Most people don't have enough time in the damn day to care about what they got to do, much less what you got to do. So it's pretty narcissistic to think that, these people are actively trying to inflict harm on me. That being the case, there are times when you can't negotiate. When negotiating is non-negotiable, I guess you could say, even though that's a double negative. The most famous example, at least in a historical conflict, would be in World War II. That would be one of the conflicts throughout history, one of the very few, and I'm a historian, I like to read a lot of history, so I have a large sample size, where one side was clearly better than the other. Not perfect, not saying they were benevolent, not saying they all had pure motives, but their intentions were at least superior to their opposition. The evil mustache man started invading different countries early on. He wanted to regain some of the territory that he lost during the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. As he was invading these countries, the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, Neville Chamberlain, didn't want another world war. He wanted to negotiate. He basically told the mustache man, I'm not going to get censored here, that if you negotiate with us and you can just have these territories, don't invade no more, have this, and please invade no more. It's like this, I used to go to this football game and they would say, please pay these prices and please pay no more. It's like, please have these countries and please have no more. But a tyrant like the mustache man isn't like you or me, where in good faith they'll make concessions. They see that as weakness. You see, people that are universally evil, and the average person isn't evil. I only know one person who I genuinely think that's not in the government, that's not in a big corporation, but a real person I know who I think is evil. I only know one person in my life, and I've met hundreds of people. I've been around all kinds of different states, all kinds of different territories. This is I only know one person who I legitimately think is evil, in my opinion. But I'll get to that in a minute. But when somebody is evil, you have to adjust accordingly to them. You don't act in good faith with somebody like the mustache man. He saw that as weakness, and he decided to go into Poland and invade other countries, and therefore a world war was happening again, which was the whole thing trying to be avoided in the first place. And it's easy for me to be an armchair quarterback, an armchair historian, and look after the fact and say, yeah, Neville Chamberlain made a mistake, because we look at history through the prism of the present rather than as it's happening in that time period. If the British would have just simply said, F you, screw you, you're not going to get these countries, they would have built up their military. And maybe one other country like France would have just basically slapped them with their wankers. I don't want to be too graphic, but you get what I'm saying. Every man knows what I'm talking about. You just whack them down. They wouldn't have invaded all those territories. They wouldn't have had all those casualties. And after the war, there was a bunch of refugees from all these different countries. All that would have been avoided. Yes, you would have had some casualties, but you wouldn't have had a large conflict because the conflict was dealt with already. If there's a bully who is trying to inflict harm, you got to deal with that. Now back to the present day. Let's circle back to the present day. I'm all about, I don't give a shit what you do. Like, if you want to be gay, be gay. If you want to do a drug in your own home, that's your prerogative. That's your business. My only thing, well, I have a couple of things that I have no tolerance for, and it's very small. Number one is anybody that tries to ruin my ability to work, to put food on the table, to bring bread back to the home. If somebody tries to get me fired from my job, if somebody tries to make it more difficult for me to get to work, if somebody tries to steal my money, I'm going to rip them apart, I'm going to cut their organs out, and I'm going to shit on their head. Plain and simple. I remember when I was working in this factory one time, the boss didn't like me. She was a bitch. And she's the only bitch I've ever had as a boss. All my other bosses were cool. They liked me. She would always bitch at me all the time. So I remember one day she walked in there and she said, I'm not going to babysit. And that means you, and pointed at me. And I said, of course you're not, because they hired me to do a job. So if you're a boss, you should shut the fuck up and you should go back there and do your thing and let me do my thing. And she just looked at me and she went to HR, and I told them straight up, I said, I've worked every weekend. I've worked all the times you guys wanted me to. I don't want someone bitching at me for no fucking reason. She's making it more difficult for me to put food on my table. Fuck her. And everybody's like, whoa, because normally I'm pretty calm and laid back, you know, like I don't really take offense to many things. But if you try to make it more difficult for me to put food on my table, I'm coming after you. Number two, if you do harm to someone who can't defend themselves, like if you want to come after me, I'm a man, go ahead. If you want to punch me in the face, if you want to come after me, we'll punch each other and we'll see who can take more punches and who's the better man. That's fine, whatever. But if you go after an animal, you go after an elderly person, you go after someone with special needs, you go after a woman or a child, and I see it's happening, I will rip your guts out and piss on you as you're ascending deep into the pit of hell. That's the way it works. And I don't want to be too graphic, but I've seen some stuff like that in life, and I had to do what I had to do. Number three, and this is my last one, is people who try to cause strife within the family. Family is essential not only for a societal structure, not only for a country structure, but for an individual structure. You want to have good relationships with your family. As you grow older, as you and your siblings move apart, you want to value those. And I'm not going to be too graphic on here, but the person I told you was evil, unfortunately, is in my family. I think she's a bitch. And I don't use that word with anybody besides her. That's the only time I've used that word with somebody I knew. I'm not someone that uses that. But she has caused strife within the family. The way I view her is, like, if I'm in an argument with a family member and I know they care, but we just disagree, or a friend, I know that they love me and they care for me. So I try to deal with them in a softer tone. I have a soft spot for that. But if somebody is a piece of shit, if somebody's a bitch, if somebody is purposely causing strife within the family, I'm going to bulldoze them over. Maybe it might not work. Maybe I ram into them in the bulldozer. It gets dense. But I'm going to ram into them all the time. I'm going to whack them. I'm going to knock them. I'm going to do anything I can because they're scum, they're trash, and they're shit. And this person thinks they're so much more intelligent. They're so much better than me. So I got no respect for that. When you're dealing with a regular person, and that's 99.99999% of people, tell yourself they're not a bad person. They're not out to get me. And do what you got to do. Do your due diligence. Your judiciary or fiduciary duty. That's what they call it. Fiduciary duty. But if they're scum, if they're like the bitch I told you about, do all you can to bulldoze them over. Not a physical fight. Not violence. But mentally throw arrows at them, swing at them, and fight the good fight. And knock that fat bully right between their face.